I continue to be enthralled by this question of if you could redesign any plant process and shape it from the cell up, what could become possible?
Erum, what's going on?
Everything. I mean, we just had Memorial Day weekend, so summer is unofficially here. Summer is during the summer solstice. We don't care. It's here. The vibe's back. So what about you? How are things going on your end?
So I went upstate for the weekend. So we drove up there on Friday afternoon. It took 6.5 hours to get there because of traffic. Everyone was leaving the city, but it was all good. It's good to be up there. It was raining pretty much the whole time. Got a couple of short hikes in, which is pretty nice. But last week we did the Synbio beta recap episode. I went back and listened to it. I thought it was a really good episode. I think anybody who's listening to this episode should go back and listen to that one if you really want to get up to date on what happened at Synbio Beta 2025 and really an overview of everything that's going on in the world of grow everything. What did you think about that episode, Erum?
Yeah, it was great to know everything that's going on in the biotech industry, the latest and greatest, the innovation that's coming out. Things are moving so fast, people. We all know that. We can all feel it. And we have to make some quick decisions on how to leverage different tools and techniques, especially when it comes to biology. It's so complex, but there's some decomplexing happening. And how do you make sure that however you're applying biotech, you're applying it in the smartest way? Otherwise, maybe your competitors, other people are doing it. If you're in business or even if you're just raising funding for a nonprofit, they're like, oh, wait, you missed this aspect of biotech. So I definitely recommend listening to it. I know there's some things that are super innovative, like quantum. I mean, I don't know what affordable quantum computing there is out there, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. And then I felt like a lot of that conversation kept resonating at the different biotech events that we went to after that, which the party keeps going on, Karl. There's no shortage of biotech events in our world.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, everything continues to evolve. And so one of the ways that we stay up to date is by going out and talking to people. We talk to founders, we talk to people at companies, we're giving panels.
Oh, yeah. And then, Karl, you headed up a panel at the Argentinian consulate here in New York City. Why did you do that? What was that event about?
So a guy who I know from Argentina, Francisco Bucara, invited me to moderate a panel called Unstoppable Entrepreneurs. And Francisco has been doing in Argentina what Nucleate does here in the United States, where they encourage scientists to become entrepreneurs. There's another organization that is doing the same thing in Argentina. And what they do is they fund these entrepreneurs, basically seed funding, small amounts of money to help them start that company, and then train them to come to a place like the United States, maybe join IndieBio. There were several of these startups have been at IndieBio. And they asked me to run a panel with Copelia Marinkovic, who is from what used to be Solvay Ventures, and then Matthias Figliosi, who is the CEO and co-founder of UniBio, an Argentinian founded ag startup that has moved to Cornell. And what was interesting is to just hear their take on what developments are available, what science is available in Latin America, and then how do you translate that into global world-class companies. So that's what that was about.
Yeah, it was a great panel. I loved when you broke out the Spanish. I was like, excuse me, Karl. I was like, hello. It was so good. That's some street cred for you, Karl. But some facts I took away was that 70% of the scientists in Argentina are biologists, which I thought was super interesting.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
And it was interesting to see the dynamic between Copelia and Matthias. So Copelia, she works for a corporate venture fund called Science Co. And I think that corporate venture funds are very interesting because they have an actual company. They have applications. They're out in the market. They have the expertise versus the typical venture fund. And to me, it seems like corporate venture funds really need to step up when it comes to investing in biotech companies. And I love that Science Co. Ventures is doing that, but we know that there are other companies that are also in this world and things that you wouldn't think of. P&G has one, Unilever. So these big consumer product good companies have venture funds. Any corporation might have one. So for those that are raising money, it'd be good to take a look at maybe just look around your house and see what corporation made that thing and then look to see if they have a venture fund. Or you can ask your favorite AI. So I loved seeing that play out, that dynamic between a corporate venture fund and a startup.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was really good. And what we do here on Grow Everything is we try to highlight biotech innovations happening all over the world. And Argentina is a powerhouse. I think that we've seen some interesting companies come out of there, and we're going to see more of them.
Mm-hmm.
Then we both attended a completely different event, which is the HC Wainwright annual biotech event. What do you think of that event, Erum? We both knew about the same number of people.
Yeah, well, you were the one who was going and you were like, Erum, come along. And I'm like, I didn't even prepare for this. You were all suited up and I was just wearing a sweater and joggers or whatever. So we go to this event. Everyone is wearing fitted, nice suits. It was mostly men, and all the ladies are wearing all their corporate gear, dresses, blazers. And I just roll up with my Doc Martens, be like, yo, what's up, everybody? I'm here to party.
But you ended up knowing a lot of the people there because there were a bunch of the Merck Ventures startups that were there. And then there were a couple of Brooklyn biotech entrepreneurs that we knew that were also there. So
Yeah, it was
it
cool.
wasn't just the old school biotech investors, so that was the big bulk of the people that were there.
Yeah, and it was good to talk to them. These are public market investors. So these are biotech companies in the market already, the public markets. They already IPO'd, they're out there. So it was really interesting because I play wing woman for a lot of these entrepreneurs when we're at these events where I try to introduce them to investors. And I was like, we just got to ask, do you invest in early stage companies? That's it. And if they don't, say hi, it's nice to meet you, maybe connect on LinkedIn, and then just move on, because we got to find out where the opportunities are. And for the early stage companies, they are not with the public market investors. But it was cool. I mean, it was on a rooftop in Manhattan, so amazing views.
At NASDAQ.
Yeah, at the NASDAQ. Yeah, exactly. So that was really, really nice. But what about you? What did you think of the event?
Okay, so I'm going to give a shout out to Thomas Hoffman of H.C. Wainwright for inviting us and just make a comment. A year ago, we attended this similar event and they had an AI panel that I was very critical of. And I may have even been critical of it here on this podcast because we had just come back from Synbio beta. I was very inspired by all the AI news in terms of like how AI is being applied to biotech across the board. So then I end up at this H.C. Wainwright event and they have an AI panel that was very under-inspiring. And it was unfortunate because it was in a room that comprised trillions of dollars of investment. And the way that one or two of the people on the panel were talking about it was just not really inspiring. So I let Tommy know that. I never heard back from him. And then maybe 6 or 8 months later, he did something really smart in terms of things that they were doing at HC Wainwright, a much more personal email. And I complimented on him. So when I ran into him at this event, he's like, look, it's Karl. I invited him even though he was super critical of me and my team. But then he also complimented me. So he knows how to play both sides. So it was just a funny thing. And then he introduced me to a bunch of people that I didn't know. But creative criticism can be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to be diplomatic when you do it. And our thing is always, how do we make the community better and stronger? And that is by encouraging people, helping people understand that there's a lot of information out there, being open to learning, asking a lot of questions. I think that that's my modus. And then right after that, the next day, there was a local event here in Brooklyn, the BSL5. That was also a lot of people that we know. Erum, I think it was a much more casual for us. It was a couple of blocks away from the office at a brewery. What was your take on that one?
I love it. I love the fact that Sam and Luke formerly had a company called Melon Frost, but now they're working at two different companies. Sam at Stealth and Luke at Caladan Bio. So Caladan Bio represented. I mean, how cool is it? It's called BSL, so biosafety level. And biosafety levels, the max is 4. So we are at BSL 5 now. So we are in a completely very unsafe environment right now. But in reality, it was very safe and comfortable. It was cool because we get to talk about the real. A lot of us have seen each other go through these companies. Now we're at different companies. And I think they're very candid. They're not just sugarcoating it and going, rah, 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 everything's going well at our companies. There were some people saying like, look, I don't agree with our CEO. They're making this decision and I think that we should be doing this. And I don't even know how to talk to this person. And I'm like, okay, well, you have to say it. You should always say what's on your mind, just like you did, Karl, with HC Wainwright. You're like, look, this is what's going on in the world. You guys were attempting to showcase this aspect of AI and bio, but it's so much bigger than what you guys talked about. And these other organizations are doing it. So same with some of our friends. They're just like, look, I just feel like there's so much more we could do. But then some people are like, you know what? Things are going great. One of them was like, I really want to create a podcast in biotech focusing on operations. I was like, hell yeah, that is super important. And I was like, look, just talk to Karl and I. We can tell you how to operate a podcast about biotech operations. But we'll give you the playbook. We need these voices out there. So if anyone's interested in starting a podcast, as long as it's not called Grow Everything #2, you should definitely go for it. But it was great. I just love our community here. It's great to see how things are growing, how people are evolving in their careers and being friendly and making new friends. It's great. And then there's some other cool things happening in New York, Karl. I mean, I know there was something going on in the Explorers Club. What was up with that? And what's Explorers Club?
So listeners might remember that back in April, my sister-in-law was presented as one of the younger scientists at the Explorers Club. And one of the people that was there was a woman whose name I can't remember, whose whole mission has been to collect and grow wildflower seeds from across New York State. And she has this bank of this. And there's these seed efforts going on all over the world. In fact, there was a seed bank in Norway. I think that there's talk about creating a seed bank up in space. Our friend Andrew Hessel has been talking about biobanking, and at some point we should have him back on to talk about that. But I found it super interesting because listeners will know that one of my obsessions is wood, growing wood without the trees, bamboo. And having gone down that rabbit hole a few months ago, one of the companies that I was introduced to was company ForayBio. And today our episode is with the CEO of Foray, a woman named Dr. Asheley Beckwith. So one of the reasons why we were interested in having her come on is because there's a lot of talk about reforesting. People are out there saying we're going to plant 1 trillion trees, but that's really not enough. We need to do a lot more planting. We're degrading the environment faster than we are remediating it. And so we thought it would be really interesting to bring Asheley on to talk about her biotech approach, her AI-driven biotech approach to creating seeds to help grow more trees and how that applies to remediating the environment, saving the environment.
With that, let's let Asheley take it away.
All right. Asheley Beckwith, Foray Bioscience. We're so happy to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thank you for welcoming me onto your show.
We're going to get into what Foray does, but first we wanted to set the stage and get into some background. You actually grew up in Colorado. I lived in Colorado for a while. It's a beautiful place. And you saw the forest disappear. First of all, what part of Colorado?
Yeah, I grew up on the Front Range, front and center, where all the action is, a lot of housing development. Every time I go back, it feels like a different place that I'm returning to.
Yeah, it's crazy, actually, when you go out there. I went to grad school in Boulder and used to commute to Denver. And that whole Boulder to Denver road was empty back then. And you could sometimes see wolves running across the plains in the morning when you're on the bus. And that is all gone. So you watched the forest disappear. And how did that shape your relationship with plants and with nature? And how did that lead to founding Foray?
In my early life, I moved from the desert of Arizona to the forests of Colorado. And so that was just a rude awakening for me and my first introduction to like forests and trees. And I was just so in awe of these forest ecosystems. And so I spent a lot of my childhood running around in this forest in my backyard. And not long after I'd really come to love this place, the housing development started moving in. These forests that I played in every day were starting to get ripped out from behind our house. It was challenging to watch. As a kid, I really wanted to do something. I would scheme with my friend, try to figure out like, hey, how can we stop this from happening? But we really felt like we had no agency being children in that stage of our lives. So just watching this destruction take place was really formative for me and had sort of reverberating effects into my later life. And then, of course, being an inhabitant of Colorado, you become really familiar with the concept of gigantic wildfires coming through and wiping out a lot of the forests. And many of those that I saw burn also have never recovered. So it's just been this really transformative thing to watch over the course of my life and my experience there. That lingering motivation and problem space is something that drove me ultimately into this founding of Foray and still is the basis of the problem that we want to solve.
Wow. Yes. I'd love to know a little bit more about your background. I can imagine you as a child going to stop this big corporation on your bike, like a Stranger Things gang, just riding your bike.
Yes, exactly.
Pesky kids.
Pesky kids trying to save the world from the upside down. We need those kids now because we live in the upside down if you watch the news. But
yeah.
So you've had this early passion for forests, for plants. And despite that, you trained as an engineer. So can you tell us more about your path and how your engineering background gives you a unique perspective in solving the problem of forestation or leveraging plants?
Yeah, I think exposure is a big factor in my early life. I didn't know anybody that worked with plants or with forest systems. And so I couldn't even conceive of a path to this world where I could have an impact on these systems. But also in my years growing as a young adult, someone in my family was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that also hit me really deeply. And I felt whatever I do, I want to have impact on people and help those that are not in a position to help themselves in this moment. So I found myself going down this path towards medicine. And I don't have the stomach to be a doctor. So I wound up in this field of engineering and medical research at the intersection of biomedical and mechanical engineering. I spent many hours in a lab working with cells of the mammalian variety and materials and understanding how they interact and how we can build better systems to create better medical outcomes. And worked in industry in the medical device world for a little while before finding my way to MIT, where I did my graduate studies. Ultimately, my master's degree was focused on building these little microchips where we could insert small pieces of tumor biopsy from an individual and test out different personal cancer treatments on those and evaluate the response to try to move towards a more personalized cancer therapy format. After my master's, though, I abruptly changed course. I had a moment to pause and reflect. You have not called a midlife crisis. I call it a quarter life crisis. Went off to the farm and worked on a permaculture farm for a little while. I just rekindled my passion for plants. And I started to see how these really intentionally designed collaborative systems between humans and plants and animals could be fruitful for everybody involved. So it started me on this path of thinking about the ways that we interact and engage with our plant systems and how could we redesign this engagement with them to be more regenerative and less extractive as a whole. So I came back to MIT with these thoughts bubbling in my head and posed this thought experiment, like what could we do if we could grow differently? So inspired by shortages of things we see in the medical space. For example, we have a shortage of kidneys for kidney transplants. And there's this interesting area of work where people are focused on how can we grow more kidneys without just having to harvest them from more people, which obviously comes with a lot of undesirable consequences. So this field of tissue engineering bubbled up, and that was really active at the time when I was studying. And with that in my mind, I thought, what if we had organ or tissue engineering alternatives for our plant system so we could grow what we needed in a really targeted way? So I launched into this thought experiment. This became a physical experiment in lab-grown wood to apply these tissue engineering concepts and use cells, this fundamental building blocks of life that we all learn about through our high school biology classes, and use those to actually build wood outside of the tree. And so that opened the door to this really interesting line of research that I explored for a number of years. And I continued to be enthralled by this question of if you could redesign any plant process and shape it from the cell up, what could become possible? So lab-grown wood was one example of that, one teaser of what might be possible in that space.
Yeah, I think when we first looked into you, our attraction was who are the people that are talking about growing wood without the trees. Lab-grown wood probably comes with benefits, pros and cons. And given that forests are so beautiful and so necessary, and there's this whole concept of rewilding the forest with trees, and we started to learn about your pivot and how things have changed. But maybe you can give us the current Foray elevator pitch. What's your mission in a sentence or two?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to give some more background. I'll give you the 2-sentence summary at the end. But yeah, the lab grown wood really opened our eyes to some of these other challenges that stood between us achieving this vision of growing only what we need and where we were today. It really got us thinking about there's this concept of problem progression. So you have this massive problem that needs to be solved, a big, hairy problem that needs to be solved. But before you can solve that problem, you actually have to solve a series of smaller problems that come before it. So an example would be like, if you want to invent Uber, the first problem you have to solve is, okay, well, how do we make the internet? So there's this series of problems that need to be solved. Lab-grown wood is sort of the Uber. Through that process, we recognized, okay, well, the internet doesn't exist yet. So now we need to build the internet. So that's what led us to a renewed thinking about where we're building and why. So the real problem that we're passionate about today is that 40% of plant species are threatened with extinction, and humans are a driving cause of that. So we need these new ways to collaborate with plants to ensure long-term access to these plant products and plant ecosystems that we rely on. So at Foray, we grow harvest-free plant products straight from the cell so that we can precisely grow exactly what we need, whether that's molecules, materials, seeds, and equipping us all as humans to take less and plant more to support this health of these systems that sustain us. So our secret sauce is figuring new ways to design this growth economically and quickly so that we can get these approaches out the door a lot faster. And we do this with the help of some of our internally designed tools, a software co-scientist that's specifically built to help us navigate this complex world of plant science. And so we use this tool internally to power development work with partners, building better access to plant products. And we're also in the process of rolling the software tool out for broader use by growers in biomanufacturing, propagation, and regeneration. That's a long answer. And the short answer is, in summary, we build things with plant cells, and we're good at figuring out how to build things with plant cells, and we can help you be good at it too. So that's the 2-sentence summary.
That's great.
I wanted to just make a quick comment. So we've also seen this company, Living Carbon, that I think you probably know. They're focused on helping grow trees faster. Yeah. And you guys are more focused on the cell side of plants in general. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Cells are a fundamental input to all of these processes. So whether you want to grow a whole tree faster or whether you want to grow just a part of a tree without having to grow the whole tree, cells are really the building block of this life. One big step in creating faster growing trees, especially in the case of Living Carbon, would be, okay, we have to engineer better genetics. And we do that at the cellular level. But then somehow we have to turn that cell back into a tree. And that process of going from cell to tree, we call it regeneration. It's a huge barrier in delivering a lot of these improved, more resilient crops into the world. And so that's part of the process that we're looking to make a lot easier with our systems, and by building this more robust and holistic understanding of plant science and plant processes.
Yeah. So walk us through what this looks like from a visual standpoint in terms of using plant cells for production, because recently we had Elon Sobel of BioHarvest and we had Michael Hilton of Exozymes, and they're producing plant molecules from either fermentation or cell-free manufacturing. Can you paint us a picture of what Foray is doing in comparison to them, and what does it look like from the visual standpoint?
Yeah. So a lot of people operating in this space are producers. They're delivering the product at the end. But the process of getting to that product involved a lot of trial and error and research and development and money and investment. And eventually they were able to generate this successful process. So Foray is not building products, the scale of the products, but we're building that process. But when we think about cells and cell systems, we're zooming out a little bit further from just this molecular production space. The plant cell is this incredibly versatile agent of production. So the plant cell contains all the information necessary to create any part of that plant or any product of that plant. So right now in biomanufacturing, you often see this one mode of production where the cell is used as a factory. You isolate the cell from the plant. You grow up a bunch of these cells in a disorganized collection. You can feed those cells with nutrient broth in a bioreactor. And then you can turn on the internal machinery in those cells to pump out certain molecules of interest. So we see the cells as factories model. But at Foray, we also see a couple of other models of using cells as agents of production. So the second would be using cells as the physical building blocks for what materials, for delivery or packaging of internal components. We see other companies in plant cell culture playing around in this space. We've obviously done some work in lab-grown wood in the past, but we also see people working on fiber production and beyond. This would be the cells as building blocks model. And then the third mode of production would be these cells are actually the foundation for creating a whole plant or creating a seed, which is a precursor to that whole plant. And so we see these cells as regenerators as well. So once you're starting from the cell, it's really, quote unquote, a stem cell. It has all this developmental potential and you can steer it across all these different directions. So a lot of people are specialized into one of these production processes and they're focused on how do you go from 1 to 100? How do you scale this and get this out into the world? At Foray, we're asking the questions, okay, how do we get from 0 to 1? And how do we do that faster so that the people who are really good at getting it from 1 to 100 can really thrive and get these products out into the world?
Now, yeah, that helps clarify how you're different in this world of biomanufacturing. This is our first time meeting, and I didn't do as much research as I should have, so my apologies. But it's like, wow. I'm starting to think of the possibilities. I know Karl is, but Karl, please, I know you and I have a hive mind and have similar questions, but go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so on one level, what you're saying is using that Uber analogy, being able to take cells and grow wood, that would be the Uber. And what you guys are doing is really using the tools that would enable that. So we're not going to get a lab grown desk anytime soon, which I'm okay with, unless it's going to be a special shape or some kind of rare wood, rare woods. But what do you think people should be paying attention to in this space? What's exciting? What are the big challenges?
Yeah, I think what's exciting about this space in general is the potential of plants and plant cells. I think biotech tends to focus a lot on the microbial space or mammalian world where things are a little bit more developed, but plants have so much potential and they have this developmental range that we can produce from the same source cell, we can produce a wide variety of products as opposed to engineering a microbe to produce one thing really well. I think these are really interesting and complementary tools. And it's exciting to me to start seeing plant cell and tissue culture getting more attention and traction as a complementary tool in the toolkit of biotech. I think plant systems are so varied and the outcomes are so varied, or the needs are so varied. And even though there's a lot of people working in this field, you have some people working over here building new access to bioactives and medicines for cosmetics and health and beauty. You have people over here working on fabricated seeds. You have people over here working on new propagation systems for a particular plant. And this knowledge that we're developing is really valuable, but it's so distributed and so dispersed and disconnected that we're not productively moving forward in the way that we could. So there are a lot of people banging their heads against these different walls. And it turns out we're all banging our heads against the same wall. And so if we could see that, we could start to connect that learning, that knowledge, and give it context, we could all start moving in the same direction, rowing in the same direction, and getting where we need to go a lot faster. And so that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve is how do we take this research on, how do we create rosewood oil from a cell culture instead of harvesting it from this endangered tree? And this other research on, okay, well, how do we propagate rosewood so we can restore these systems to the forests where they live? Well, it turns out those sets of biological knowledge are related. So what if we could bring those learnings together and create a more comprehensive understanding of cellular processes and thus achieve better control so we can have these compound effects?
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you need to be the one who organizes the conference that brings all these disparate minds together so that you guys all know what is going on, and then you can make a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to say.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what we're passionate about doing and creating this software platform that can help to bring context to data, that can help bring additional understanding to the data that's been developed in the past and help us fill in the gaps that exist so that we can be more productive as a field in the future. That's one thing that we're really excited about, this software co-scientist tool and R&D management tool that we're about to roll out.
Yeah. So walk us through a case study. So talk to us about the possibilities. You talk to us about the rosewood. How does Foray play into this? You mentioned there's a wet lab component to this as well, or a manufacturing component. Walk us through a case study. And if you want to use rosewood oil, that's fine, or something else that you're very excited about, or maybe you're working on today.
Yeah. We have a number of active projects today that I'm really excited about that really showcases the versatility of this process-oriented mindset to developing these cell culture systems. So one is we're working with a nonprofit out in California that is focused on preserving the biodiversity that exists in the state of California. There are some species that have been recently extinct out there, again, wiped out by encouraging housing developments. So we're working on a path to reintroduce those recently extinct species into the wild by creating a seed from a limited amount of plant material that is still available. We take this plant material, we generate the cells, we turn those cells into embryos, then we encapsulate those embryos in a nutrient pocket. So in effect, it's a fabricated seed. We have the biological component, which is destined to become the plant, and we have the package of food to get that embryo through its early days of life until it starts photosynthesizing for itself. So we're building this pathway for de-extinction through fabricated seeds to be able to reintroduce these species to the wild. So this is one case study and one thing that becomes possible when we are able to bring this type of technology efficiently to a species where we don't have a lot of plant material or resources to play around with. This is a rare species, so you have to get it right from the beginning because you don't want to waste these resources. So that's where engineering a better process for approaching this will help us be really strategic.
I want to unpack that a little bit more. My favorite class in grad school was plant cell and tissue culture. I was lucky enough to actually work with plant cells and grow them on petri dishes, and you could control the media so that you would either get roots or you would get leaves. But you're talking about doing that on a level where either you can take the plant cells and grow seeds from them. What does that look like in practice? And maybe without giving away too much information. Am I getting it right? You would basically do plant cell tissue culture, but maybe you're manipulating the cells in a way that you're going to get seeds?
Yeah. So if you imagine that cell lives on this landscape of developmental opportunity. So from that quote unquote stem cell, we could nudge that cell. In your studies, you would have nudged that cell in the direction of root formation. So you're convincing that cell through these external signals to become a root cell, or you can convince that cell to become a leaf cell, or to just continue to persist as this undefined cell. But you can also push that cell to become an embryo, which is the precursor to a seed. And an embryo basically just has this dual ability to form both the roots and the leaves from the same biological mass. So it's on the same landscape of development where you would have played before. Why we're excited about this is seed supply is a huge barrier when it comes to achieving our ecological restoration goals. So in the US Forest Service is usually only restoring about 6% of post-wildfire restoration sites. A big part of that is we don't have the seed to actually meet those planting goals. So how can we create access to seed when that seed doesn't exist or it's so impractical to collect that we don't have access through natural processes? So we're focused on taking a limited amount of biological material. So we can take cells from a little plant biopsy, we can take cells from a handful of seeds and turn those into these embryos, which can make many more seeds. So we can amplify those seed stores and make sure that restoration takes place in a time frame where it's still able to be effective.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really incredible. The idea of creating seeds and this application for creating more biodiversity in California to restore lands that have been ravaged by wildfires, which is such a huge issue. And then I also think about being able to maybe take it a step further and a little bit wild in terms of plants that are extinct. and thinking about how to de-extinct them, the whole colossal world that they're focused on animals, plants, I think. They're all interesting, but maybe more accessible. And it reminds me of also Revive and Restore, which I'm sure you know that group well.
Yeah.
So that's cool. The California making these seeds enable biodiversity. Is that the main vertical? But you said you had different projects. How else can we leverage the creation of seeds? And I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and the de-extinction world, just to put a final cap on that, it's such an interesting space right now. And we're thinking about animals because they're super charismatic, but this extinction is happening now. Yeah. And how do we save these species that provide us value today and won't be here tomorrow? I think the opportunity to act before it's 20,000 years later is really compelling, but it does force people to really appreciate these resources on an individualized level. We have a lot of plant blindness, like, oh, I still see a lot of green outside. But the health of those plant systems is totally dependent on this population, community level collection of these various species that self-reinforce and create this positive environment for all of them. Even though there's green outside, it doesn't mean that it's a healthy ecosystem. So being able to implement these seed technologies to that end is really exciting to us. But in terms of other verticals, so our internal passion project is these fabricated seeds, and we're looking for more opportunities to build and deploy in this space. But we also do contracted work with partners in other sectors as well. So as I said, we're like process builders. We build from 0 to 1, and we help people discover these new ways of producing goods that we depend on every day. So we have another client in the fiber products world where we're thinking about how could we build better fibers that don't have to be necessarily harvested from trees if that supply becomes constrained, but could also have better and superior performance so that we could use less overall. So this is another interesting line of work. We have done additional work in the production of bioactives or fragrances from a species where we would alternatively have to tear down the tree and chop it up and extract it in chemicals. So just creating these new pathways and really exploring the full realm of this possibility. So we work with partners in two ways. One, we're trying to enable people and help people build where they are by rolling out the same platform technologies that we use internally so that they can use them internally as well. We recognize the need to get these solutions out the door as quickly as possible. And that means we need the experts on the problems best equipped to create and deploy these solutions. That's where we want to put the power of effective plant R&D in the hands of those people. So that's through our software system. And then we also collaborate. Our real scientists come and work on projects collaboratively with partners who engage us to develop processes together.
Wow. So you guys are doing these partnerships and clearly have clients, but a lot of startups, particularly in biotech or biomanufacturing, face the so-called valley of death between proof of concept and commercialization. You guys recently raised some money, maybe not so recently, you can correct me. But what convinced your investors that Foray could bridge the gap between that proof of concept and commercialization?
Yeah, I think first is we have a strong and constant vision to use biomanufacturing to protect and restore ecosystems. And we've been able to find investors who have strong alignment with that vision. So they're really in it for the long haul, and they recognize, as we do, the potential of this technology to be transformative. The second is we have a business model that I feel makes sense given the state of maturity of the field. So if we're talking about this problem progression that needs to take place, we are creating that solution to the first problem that needs to be solved. So it makes sense, and we'll be able to grow and expand our capabilities as the field continues to mature. Then there's a history of execution and what we've been able to steadily show as we've been building over the last few years, and just producing consistent results, I think, builds confidence and trust with those investors that have been along for the ride. But again, I think we touched on this before. The unique thing I think about Foray is that where most others in the field are product first, we are this platform first company. And we recognize the importance of others being successful in order for this field to have the impact that we want it to have. So we have this interesting partnership model where success doesn't mean we have success in one product, but it means that we are helping drive innovation across a wide range of products. And it maintains this optionality that builds resiliency into our business plan.
Yeah, I mean, the companies that we had on before, oftentimes they are building products to prove out their platform. So the companies that we've had on the past are doing that to showcase to the industry that, hey, look, this is how you can leverage our platform. And we've proven that we got costs down. So when you first were talking about going from cell to seed, my mind was like, how long does that take? I was curious to see how that plays out from a process and industrial point of view, because if you're selling to these companies, they're going to decide, if I want to make a bioactive or a fragrance, which process can get me that fragrance at the cheapest cost? And obviously, the good quality, but cost is always a factor. What do you think about that? How do you compare against cell-free and all these other types of methodologies to produce the fragrances? Are you saying you'd work with the cell-free companies, or are you going to compete against them? It'd be good to know from an industrial standpoint how that looks to you.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to be selling fragrances, so we won't be direct competitors to those organizations, but we recognize plant cell culture has value in particular applications, and it's going to be outcompeted by other technologies and other applications. Yeah. And so you really do have to be able to do this realistic assessment of, when is this the right tool for the job? Plant cells are valuable when it comes to producing really complex products, whether those are really large and complicated molecules or complicated mixtures of molecules. Obviously, you're not producing plant embryos from yeast. There are really these well-defined niches where plant cells and plant cell culture will be able to uniquely provide what the customer is looking for in order to get to a state where we can prove out that product can be produced in plant cell culture. That's the big mystery. That's the unknown today. We have like 450,000 land plants in the world. We have experimented in cell culture with a tiny, tiny fraction of them, probably less than 1%, probably much less than 1%. That means there are all of these gaps in knowledge. Everything is high risk. So how do you start to bring the risk down overall? How do you start to make these new endeavors more accessible and more cost effective? Because right now it's a lot of trial and error. It's super artisanal. People, like you said, you have to prove out that it works first. So you're throwing in tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this process to maybe come out with a successful prototype. Maybe you never even create a successful cell line. And that's a reality for a lot of the cell and tissue culture world in plants today. That's where there are a whole lot of pieces along this production chain that require innovation for plant cells, because this is still a new field. So going from 1 to 100 is hard, and there's a lot of innovation required there. But going from 0 to 1, that's the blocker. If you can't get to 1, you can't get to 100. That's where we're focused. Like, how do you take an R&D timeline that can be 6 months or 20 years and cram it all down so the upper end of that timeline is always at 6 months? So how do you make that R&D process reliable and accessible? That's what we're really focused on.
One of the things that strikes me, Asheley, is, I haven't said this in a while, but in our earlier podcast episodes, I used to say we need every solution everywhere all at once. And hearing you say this reminds me of that, because you've got these efforts that are like, we're planting 1 trillion trees or 1 billion trees, and they're planting seedlings, and the survival rate is very low, is what I understand. It's one thing to drop them out of an airplane and blanket unforested area with them, but you need every solution. You need your solution where you're bringing seeds. You might need those tissue-grown saplings, and you need to understand what the climate is going to do to that thing. And you guys seem to fit really nicely into that. When you think about this entire infrastructure of plant products, what excites you the most about this kind of intersection between biology, forestry, and manufacturing or biomanufacturing?
Yeah, what excites me is we're starting to see, with this renewed enthusiasm around plants and our ecological systems and this understanding that, oh, actually, we can't just extract, we have to manage these systems responsibly. We're starting to see all of these incredible emerging scientific tools applied to understanding these systems. So from the micro scale to the macro scale, our understanding of these plant systems and what they can do and what they need to survive is maturing at this really exciting rate. And I think when we start looking from the epigenetic or genetic level to the ecological level, and we have these multiple perspectives coming together to examine these systems, I hope we'll start to appreciate these systems for what they are and understand them in ways that we had never have been able to. We're starting to better understand, what does biodiversity really mean? What makes a plant adaptable to its ecosystem? What makes an ecosystem resilient to changes in the climate? So these are all amazing insights that are coming to fruition now, thanks to the new and emerging tools and the focus of really dedicated people to this space. We have some friends, I'll just do a shameless plug for some of their cool work, but we have some friends at the University of Vermont, Dr. Steve Keller over there, and Dr. Matt Fitzpatrick over at the University of Maryland, who are building this incredible understanding of how forests are adapting in real time and where in the environment these micro adaptations are happening, and how that knowledge can influence the seeds that we collect and where we use those seeds to have the most resilient and productive forests going into the future as our climates shift and migrate faster than our forests can. So this is just one example of some of the cool work that's happening that I think will open the doors to new ways of interacting with these ecosystems. So yeah, that's what I'm cautiously optimistic about all this engagement that's taking shape.
Yeah, I just love your perspective going from the genetic level to the ecosystem level. It's so vast, and these micro adaptations with a larger shift in climate rates, it's a lot. But now we're in a place where we have tools that are more accessible on the software side, like leveraging AI to be able to model things, get insights, generate, simulate, and to be able to help collect insights across these scales. I mean, I'm sure you're using software on many different processes, but where did you see the biggest leap in your process? You're talking about this co-scientist. And what is it doing? Is it generating hypotheses? Is it creating experiments? Where do you see the most excitement in your world when it comes to using AI in your process or your platform?
Yeah, what's really exciting to me is, like we were just talking about, we have all this knowledge bubbling to the surface across scales, and it would be so infeasible for any one scientist to link, this genetic change here that is being studied for this purpose in the biotech space actually has these big ecological ramifications. What we can do with AI and these software tools is start to connect the dots between what seem like to an individual scientist focused on an individual goal to be remote data points or unrelated data. And we can start to bring that together to create a more holistic understanding of how these systems work. That's one thing our software co-scientist is working to do, is consolidate a lot of the knowledge that exists and contextualize it, help us connect these dots so that we can make more strategic decisions when it comes to R&D. So from this literature synthesis and hypothesis, research goals setting to R&D management, how do I design better experiments when I'm trying to navigate these organisms that have some of the most complex genomes and also are controlled by 40, 50 different variables in these experiments? How do I navigate this space efficiently? And this is where being able to package these tools in a way that's accessible and useful to scientists who are doing work in the lab every day, our scientists can help everybody move more effectively in their lane of science. So that's where we're excited about these tools. I do think there's something important about creating a specific form factor for these tools and a specific process flow for these tools that's really niche and specific to the area of science that you're working in, because science is not a monolith. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to build a process for science, I know there are many that are doing that and they're very effective, but I feel like plant science, often we find the tools, they just don't work for us. It's just not right for our process. And so there needs to be a more targeted approach in this space. And so that's what we're working on delivering.
And how do you think these tools might compare to the tools that are being developed, say, for agriculture? I know probably people are more focused on how do I keep my crop of corn alive in Iowa this time of the year? What's the difference?
I'll preface this by saying I'm not an expert in all the software that exists in the agriculture space, but I think we're on this journey. We have some of these niche tools that have been developed for a really narrow, specific application. I'm sure the big agriculture crop breeding companies have their specific tools for understanding how this gene affects this trait, and they have a process that's well structured to deliver that in the top 5 row crops or something. But beyond that, it's not really applicable. Or if you have some farmer growing corn in the field, you might have a specific tool designed for them to help advise them on when to fertilize or when to water. But it's not a broad plant science tool. But then on the other hand, I feel like we've ping-ponged to the other side where now we have a bunch of really generalist science tools coming out. And for certain aspects of science, maybe that will be useful. Literature review, one such example. But when it comes to helping us design better experiments and do better science, what the requirements are there are going to vary depending on what field you're in, what type of science you're doing. I think we're going to probably find ourselves as a field of scientists working in AI migrating back to this middle ground where there's some more structure to really satisfy our specific needs.
Yeah. And agriculture is oftentimes monoculture, where you're looking at diversity and you're looking at, again, large ecosystems. If we had another 20 minutes, I will talk about how you look at the soil microbiomes and how you take that into consideration when developing seeds. But you're in this role, you're hitting this organization. What does the world look like for you in 5 to 10 years? What was Foray doing? What impact has it had? Let's visioneer.
Yeah, in 5 to 10 years, I want every plant scientist working in bioproduction and agriculture and forestry and academia to be building more effectively because they're working with Foray's new plant operating system.
Ooh,
and so
I like that.
We want to be powering the next innovations in plant biology and helping to accelerate the field towards the solutions that we need and the timeframes that we need them, so that we can start to build this regenerative system for humans and for plants. I would invite anybody who hears this call into the wild, if you're thinking about this too and how to build better in this space and accelerate plant science, let's talk, let's think together about this, because this is the big challenge.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Plants in space too. Let's not forget space.
Oh yeah, plants in space. Yeah.
You bring the space in there, Erum.
You got to think about what happens in zero gravity, because we talked to Evan Bayer about cultivating mycelium in zero gravity, and that's completely different. Biology accelerates, the replication of cells accelerates in zero gravity. We just came off of going to Synbio beta, and that was one big key takeaway. I'm like, oh, things grow faster, biology moves faster in zero gravity. Interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I always like to throw that in.
It's wild. Yeah, there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know on this planet.
Yeah.
And then when you leave this planet, the world is your oyster. Can you still say that if you're in outer space?
Yeah.
So to kind of close things out, Asheley, if someone asks, why should I care about plant cell culture? What do you say to them?
We have plants to thank for the air we breathe, for the food we eat, the houses we live in, the fuels that power us. Plants are life. And the only way to sustain that life is by changing the extraction equation. So we need to take less and we need to plant more. It's a simple equation, but plant cell culture can do that for us. Plant cell culture can help us grow better. That's why it matters. And I always say to people, whether you know it or not, you are a plant person. So we're all plant people.
Yes, we're all plant people. I can't wait to learn more about Foray, see what you guys are doing, especially in California, the biodiversity. I'm thinking of commercial applications. That's just me. I would love to have more diverse plants in my house, not just pothos plants. There's more house plants instead of pothos plants. But it's incredible speaking with you, learning more. I'm just very inspired. Thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast, Asheley.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Yay.
Thanks, Asheley. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So, Karl, what'd you think of that episode?
First of all, it was great. I loved Asheley. And her big question is, how do we save plants today? And we had that whole discussion about the people who say that they're planting trillions of trees, but unless you're taking care of those trees as you plant them, they're not really going to grow. They're basically blanket bombing areas with seedlings, mini trees, but that's not really enough. Probably 1 out of 1,000, maybe even only 1 out of 100 of those trees is really going to grow. So I thought Ashley's approach is much more sane and will probably be much more successful. This idea of being able to take plant tissue and then using that tissue to grow seeds. You can grow a lot more seeds and you can grow a lot more seedlings. And then you can sell those or you can give them to people who are going to actually plant them and then manage or serve as stewards of these forests. What did you think, Erum?
Yeah, I love the approach. I think the idea too is around biodiversity. Not just one plant can create a whole forest. You really have to think about the whole ecosystem. And one of the things I touched on or wanted to dig deeper into maybe in another episode with Asheley is, how does she look at the seedlings? And then what does the soil microbiome need to look like? in order to support the growth of these seeds? And what is the mix? Is there like 6 trees minimum that need to be in an ecosystem where they can start thriving and welcoming other plants and animals and microbes? So I love that. We were talking about thinking from the DNA level all the way out to like the forest level and putting climate as a variable. When the climate shifts, so do the forests shift. They move. I love when you start talking about the forests move. So being able to track all of that is really interesting. I would love to see their lab and also their platform. They're talking about what are all the variables in there? What are they simulating on their platform?
Yeah. What I find so interesting about that platform is just thinking about the complexity of a forest. And you're talking about the microbiome of the forest. And I'm thinking about all the plants that are growing, dying, the leaf cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if she has in mind that they would partner with a company like Indigo or Pivot Bio that specialize in coating seeds with microbes that enable them to grow better. I mean, that's something that we should talk to her about and maybe make those introductions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is the fact that she's growing cells to produce seeds is just a reminder that cells are factories, they're building blocks, it can be delivery systems, but it is an extremely complicated idea of rewilding. You can let it happen on its own or you can push it along.
Right. And it's not just a science project. She's working with companies that are looking to make fiber products, bioactives, fragrances. So she's really pushing all boundaries. How do we monetize something like this? How do we ensure that there's value being created for, and not just value in terms of dollars and cents, but value in terms of biodiversity and being able to grow things in a responsible way, in a smart, responsible way. So it's great. We love that Ashley's focusing on this. We want more people focusing on this. That's the purpose of this podcast. We're bringing you all of these incredible people, all these incredible minds, so you are inspired as well. So I just love it. And I can't wait to talk to Ashley again.
Yeah, I just want to end by saying in the Synbio beta episode, we talked about one of the biomanufacturing panels that Henry Lee of Cultivation held. And I ended up by saying we need a dirty biology manifesto because biology thrives around microbes. It produces trees. It produces the agriculture that gives us food. So biology really does work in these consortia, and it's really dirty. And we have adopted this idea from biopharma that we need stainless steel tanks to produce materials, medicines, actives. And I think we need to start looking at the other way of doing things, which is what I call dirty biology. But I'll just leave it at that. That's a topic for us to explore in the future.
Yes. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we do talk about dirty biology, and we definitely need to put a pin on that. But thanks for listening. And that's the pod.
Talk to you later.